The car came out of nowhere. The turn was sharp, the wheel snapped, and 2 people died. The last time we were together, I discussed the history of the most successful film studio from the silent film era that existed in the Portland area. This studio, Premium Picture Productions, began operations at the start of 1921, but there were obviously other studios in the area that predated that one. One of these was called Multnomah Films, and they only ever made one film. Shot under the working title of Martyrs of Yesterday, upon release, this 10-minute film was officially titled In the Land of the Setting Sun. It is described as a romance film, woven into the story of the Whitman Massacre. In short, the Whitman Massacre occurred in 1847 near Walla Walla, Washington, when a nearby Native American tribe killed several people, including missionaries Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. They did this in the aftermath of a measles outbreak, wherein the tribe believed Marcus Whitman had poisoned many of them. If you look up this film on IMDb, you will see 4 credited actors. Granted, of course, the older the film, the less actors would be credited. The 4 actors listed, all men, were led by John Herschelt, an actor who appeared in almost 150 films between 1906 and 1946. He's perhaps best known for being a primary character in Erich von Stroheim's 1924 film Greed. 2 other actors in it, J. Barney Sherry and Ralph Lewis, both appeared in excess of 175 films in their careers. And then there was a Leland Tubbs, whose only known film credit was this one film, and he almost died on it, but we'll get to that. Had more credits been given, and had things gone differently, a certain teenage girl would have shown up in the credits for this film. Production on this lone Multnomah Films venture started on May 15, 1919, using the interiors of the American Lithograph studio that once stood at 33rd and Halsey on the edge of Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood. This was followed by shooting days at various exterior locations. One of these was the Baker Bridge, which at this time was a covered bridge, long since replaced. Come May 28th, 12 individuals boarded an automobile bus, which, despite use of the term bus, the vehicle was really just kind of a beefed-up convertible with no cover. The individuals aboard were a mix of actors and crew. Once departing from the Lithograph studio, they traveled into the heart of Laurelhurst, an area known for its strangely rounded streets and odd intersections. Upon their approach to the intersection of Hazelfern and Peerless Place, a vehicle appeared out of nowhere. Witnesses in the car and in the vicinity would say this car cut off the bus, which had the right-of-way. The bus's driver, E.E. Davenport, swerved sharply to avoid an accident, but due to the size of his vehicle, as well as one of the wheels snapping off, the bus flipped hard onto its side. When this happened, 2 individuals in the car, George C. Held and Edna Gaynor, had their bodies partially thrown under the side of the bus that landed on the ground. They were both killed almost instantly, sustaining death caused by skull fractures. Held was an assistant cameraman on the production who'd also worked as a photographer at the Oregonian. The 16-year-old Gaynor had been brought on to, sadly, no surprise considering the time, play a Native American girl. She was, reportedly, the 5th member in her family to die in recent months. We have no idea if this was just something she was doing for fun, if she was picked out of a crowd by producers, or if she had a genuine interest in getting into acting. However she felt, She had to be excited at the time, and whatever she wanted out of life, she never had a chance to pursue it. 5 others in the bus were injured, including driver Davenport, who sustained a dislocated shoulder, as well as various cuts and scrapes around his face and head. A Richard Mulford sustained a chest injury. A Ruth Emig sustained a back injury. And passengers Ethel Dunn and Mrs. A.P. DeKaiser sustained minor scrapes and bruises. It's a wonder how nearly half the people on this bus escaped without injury. The male driver of the car that cut him off, traveling with a female companion, despite clearly having to have seen what he had done, never stopped and fled the scene. As far as I could gather, he was never identified and never brought to justice for, at the very least, leaving a deadly car crash that he had caused. A local paper described him as having utterly disregarded every element of carefulness and inhumanely speeded on when his wanton action had been responsible for the death of the 2 persons. Everyone on the scene in the aftermath stated clearly and forcefully that the man driving the car was responsible for the accident. However, when a jury was called to investigate the situation, all of a sudden things were not quite as clear-cut. Not only were witnesses varying in their accounts of what happened and who was responsible, but the jury in question consisted of residents who lived in the immediate vicinity of where the accident occurred. This may have bore some significance in the conclusions that this jury reached. At least one bus passenger, Emery Dye, said that Davenport was speeding, going about 33 miles an hour. It was felt the man driving the car was going about 35 miles an hour. Yes, once upon a time, going over 30 miles an hour did constitute speeding. This was used to imply that both vehicles may have bore some fault in the accident. The jury also became fixated on the question of what would anyone do in a situation like this? What would they do different? Were they using this to validate the actions of both drivers? Regardless, none of this dismissed the fact that the driver of the car, based on eyewitness accounts, was clearly at fault for the accident by cutting off the bus. And yet the jury appeared satisfied in not resolving the situation. Could this have been affected by the fact that the man driving the car had not been identified and was not likely to be? I think it played a role. Had this man been caught and ID'd shortly after, I have a feeling the whole situation would have played out quite differently. In the end, the jury focused more on the need to have more stringent traffic laws than resolving this fatal crash, as should have been their objective. They wanted to argue that overgrown brush on a vacant property had likely obstructed the man in the car's view of the bus, and thus, things like that also needed to be taken care of. How they could say this when we cannot say at all exactly what this man saw since he was never found is beyond me. What I'm getting at is that these already biased jurors, as they were locals, appeared to use this accident not as an instance to gain justice for the injured and deceased, but rather as an opportunity to push to improve the conditions of their own neighborhood. Again, the Laurelhurst area was and is full of wrapping roads, often asking for car accidents, and I'm sure way back in 1919 accidents were commonplace there. And putting blame on overgrowth on a vacant property, asking for such things to be forcibly dealt with, would go a long ways towards improving the appearance of this already affluent neighborhood. That's at least my take. It appears Edna Gaynor was replaced as ultimately this shoot on the Baker Bridge was done. The film was completed and released, and strangely enough, this bus crash was not the only near-death experience a cast member had during the shooting of this one reel film. Only 4 days after the crash, actor Leland Tubbs, who I mentioned earlier, was rushed to a hospital after sustaining a gunshot wound and powder burns to his thigh. This happened when a fellow performer shot him at close range with a blank cartridge from a rifle he thought wasn't loaded. And it shouldn't have been. It was considered a mystery as to how this rifle ended up being loaded at all. But unlike Held and Gaynor, Tubbs was able to escape with his life. And that was a wrap, not only on this troubling film production, but as far as we can tell, the production company Multnomah Films as a whole. There's no evidence they produced another film or that they functioned beyond 1919. I found one article from January 1921 referencing stocks in the company that a wealthy couple had owned, but this is no indication that they were still in existence at this point. And that was it. This film company vanished right off the face of the earth.